Tonight, the papal visit. America's second Catholic president meets with the head of the Catholic Church while President Biden's multi-trillion-dollar economic agenda back at home is on the line.
This framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people.
Plus, the showdown over COVID-19 vaccine mandates.
We're not anti-vaccine, we're anti-mandate.
Police, firefighters, and New York City workers have until tonight to get their first shot or risk losing their jobs. All this and more tonight on Faith Nation.
The White House hoping Democrats rally to support President Biden's domestic agenda while he is on the world stage. Welcome to Faith Nation. I'm John Jessup. Our top story in a moment, but first, the FDA clearing the way for COVID-19 vaccinations for young children. The agency authorized kid-sized doses of the Pfizer vaccine, a third of the amount given to teens and adults, for emergency use in children ages 5 to 11 years old. On Tuesday, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention will make more detailed recommendations for the 28 million American children who could be eligible ahead of a final decision from the CDC. Well, just as President Biden's domestic agenda has exposed division among fellow Democrats, today's historic visit to the Vatican highlights how his views on abortion puts Biden at odds with many in the Roman Catholic Church. CBN's Tara Mergener is tracking his trip. Tara, this foreign tour is both policy and personal for the president.
That's right, John. The president and the Pope reportedly discussed a number of issues, including COVID and climate change. But the president also says the Pope approves of him receiving communion despite his pro-choice position.
Arriving at the Vatican this morning, President Biden, the second Catholic president, met with the Pope one-on-one for 90 minutes. Biden said they didn't talk about abortion, but he shut down a question about some conservative U.S. bishops trying to deny him communion because he supports it.
We just talked about the fact that he was happy that was a good Catholic and
You discussed the Conference of Bishops.
That's a private conversation.
Too many no votes for the bill to pass.
This trip happening just hours after the House failed to vote on the Senate-passed bipartisan infrastructure bill. His social spending plan also hanging in the balance, with moderate and progressive Democrats squabbling over details.
This framework includes historic investments in our nation and in our people.
Before taking off, Biden making a pit stop on Capitol Hill, offering a new framework for a spending package, hoping to help get it over the finish line.
If you took any one piece of it, it would be transformative and historic.
The $1.7 trillion plan includes money for free universal pre-K, extending the child tax credit, money for child and elder care, and expanding Medicare to cover hearing. There is also $500 billion for action on climate change, with tax incentives for electric cars and charging stations. But progressives are furious over the cuts.
Put paid leave in, it's in, and then all of a sudden at the last minute, somebody said it's out. And I'm going to fight every single moment to try and get this back in.
Negotiations continue, and the White House says it's confident both packages will pass, but they aren't saying when.
We make these investments, there will be no stopping the American people or America. So let's get this done.
And next he heads to the G20 summit, where he will meet with world leaders, and then off to a climate change summit in Glasgow, John.
All right, CBN's Tara Mergener. Thank you so much, Tara. Well, here with us now is Father Thomas Reese, Senior Analyst at Religion News Service. Father Reese, it's always nice to see you. Thank you for joining us back here on Faith Nation. We did not bring you here, Father, to talk about the president's stance on abortion or his ability to receive communion, but it did come up again after his meeting with Pope Francis. And you, as a Jesuit priest, are probably better to answer this than most. Why is this an issue President Biden can't seem to get away from?
Well, he can't get away from it because some bishops in the United States keep bringing it up, despite the fact that the Pope has indicated that he has never denied communion to anyone, and despite the fact that the Vatican has said that they don't think the bishops should go down this route. The American bishops seem to be the only ones doing this. Pope John Paul II, for example, gave communion to the pro-choice mayor of Rome. He also gave communion to Tony Blair when he was prime minister, and at that time he was a pro-choice Episcopalian. So this is not an issue except in the United States among some of the bishops.
President Biden and the Pope spoke for about an hour and a half or so. Is that unprecedented for Pope Francis to spend that much time with the head of state? And does that speak to the personal nature of their relationship?
I think that's extraordinary, the hour and a half that they spent together. It shows that they had a lot to talk about. Clearly the Pope is concerned about global warming and wants to support the president in his efforts at the COP26 meeting in Scotland that's coming up. I think the Vatican is disappointed that the Congress is not behind the president on this and is kind of tied one hand behind his back. I think the Vatican would have loved to have seen the United States in a position to say, hey, we're doing all we can, and now you should do it too. Instead, he's going to be trying to ask countries to do things that we aren't willing to do. That's not going to be good for the planet.
As you just suggested, the Vatican's stance or the Pope's stance when it comes to climate change lines up with the president's. Where does the Pope's thinking on the other aspects of the economic issues tend to line up with President Biden's plan?
Well, to be perfectly honest with you, I think that Pope Francis is closer to Bernie Sanders than to Joe Biden. The Pope is very progressive when it comes to economic issues, in support of a living wage, which has been Catholic social teaching for centuries, and very strong in terms of workers' rights, of protecting the environment, of reducing the amount of inequality in wealth and income around the world. So I think that the Pope is supporting what President Biden is doing, right. But frankly, I think he'd be pushing even farther.
Real quickly, we only have about a half minute left. Pope Francis today said Biden was, quote, the most significant warrior for peace. What do you think he meant by that?
Well, I think what President Biden meant was that the Pope is really on the side of peace. He's been on the side of peace in the Middle East. He's been on this, he is a Pope of reconciliation between Christians and Muslims, reconciliation between Protestants and Catholics. He sees the world as a family, and as a family, we should get along with one another.
All right. That is a great final word to leave it on. Father Thomas Reese, thank you so much for your time today.
Good to be with you.
Disgraced former New York Governor Andrew Cuomo, who resigned in August in the face of sexual harassment allegations, now faces a criminal charge. Cuomo is charged with forcible touching, a misdemeanor with a penalty of up to a year in jail. It's the first criminal charge in the wake of his resignation. The complaint based on the account of one of the dozen or so women whose accusations were detailed in a New York State Attorney General report this past summer. Well, to the campaign trail, 4 days and counting until the off-year election, where state races in Virginia are seen as a possible indicator about which way political winds are blowing for the country. From deadlocked to toss-up to Republican candidate for governor pulling ahead, at least in one poll, in a race with a lot at stake for both parties. The latest Fox News survey shows Republican Glenn Youngkin 8 points ahead of Democratic candidate Terry McAuliffe. Still, a Washington Post poll ranks the matchup neck and neck in a statistical dead heat. Well, here with us now for our Friday Faith Nation political panel, CBN News chief political analyst David Brody and Julia Manchester, political reporter for The Hill. If I can speak now. David, Julia, happy Friday. Thanks for being with us. Julia, let's start with you. With just a few days before voters head to the polls in Virginia, how do you see things shaping up there in the governor's race? And is that Fox News poll an outlier, or does it show something that should concern the McAuliffe campaign?
Well, I think right now, all of the polling shows that among likely voters, it's either very tight or Youngkin is slightly ahead. So in that it shows him 8 points ahead. I would say it is a bit of an outlier. However, I would say that the McAuliffe campaign should be looking at every poll at this point, every reputable poll, and Fox News polling is reputable, as a serious indication of what could be likely to come. Now, you see Youngkin pulling ahead with likely voters. That indicates there's enthusiasm within the Virginia Republican base. However, among registered voters, normally it's tied or Terry McAuliffe is leading. In fact, in that Washington Post poll that was released earlier today, Terry McAuliffe's leading by 4 points, I believe, among registered voters in Virginia. So it will depend if those likely voters do in fact come out to vote. That will be a good sign for Youngkin. But John, I think regardless of what poll we're looking at here now, it's a close race. It's going to be a late night, and it's going to be a nail breaker. A nail biter, I should say. Hopefully no breaking nails.
I agreed with you. David, speaking of this tight race in Virginia, it coincides with President Biden's stalled agenda on Capitol Hill. How much of a factor does the outcome of those spending plans have on Virginia voters? And do you think a failure to deliver gives McAuliffe's campaign someone or something to blame?
Well, look, I don't think Virginia voters are going around going, you know, what's the latest on the infrastructure deal? I mean, I think they've got dinner to put on the table and they got the kids in school and everything. I don't think it's like that. Having said that, Terry McAuliffe wanted that hard infrastructure vote on Thursday. It never happened. So, I mean, you know, it's technically from a political standpoint, it's not good for him. And look, overall, it's been not good for McAuliffe. I mean, the truth of the matter is, as it relates to Terry McAuliffe, he's a well-known guy. Everybody knows him in Virginia, the former governor. Joe Biden's the president. You would think that Virginia is blue, and it's been becoming more and more blue as the years have gone on, and he's in a tight race. That is not good news for McAuliffe. But, you know, ultimately, when it comes to Biden, what are you going to do? You're just going to have to, you know, kind of bite the bullet here and just say, you know, I'm going to either sink or swim with this agenda. So I think it's not going to fully hurt McAuliffe, but it doesn't help for sure.
Julia, the president's personal pitch for the framework mirrors another trek he made to the Hill in September. The votes simply weren't there either. Negotiations we're hearing between moderates and progressives are ongoing. Based on your reporting, what are you hearing, and how and when will a deal get done?
Well, from what I've been hearing, it's pretty deadlocked right now between moderates and progressives. Look, I don't think progressives want to give much at this point. I think they are committed to a bigger bill. They want some of those initiatives, such as paid family leave, included in this legislation. But you have a number of big name moderates, whether it's Nancy Pelosi or even former President Obama, issuing statements and basically saying, in what appears to be a message to progressives, look, we've got to hunker down and do this. This is our chance to get this, this amount of our proposals through. This is the biggest chance we've had in a while, and that we can essentially tackle other issues like paid family leave down the line. But a lot of progressives don't want to do that. And I think a lot of Democratic leaders on Capitol Hill are really pushing this right now because they don't want to embarrass Joe Biden when he's overseas. Joe Biden wants to see a victory when he's overseas. I think that will make him look probably more reliable, a better look in front of other world leaders. So they don't want his agenda to be failing when he's on U.S. soil.
We have only about a minute left, and we have to squeeze in this last question. If both of you can hit it, that's great. David, I'm going to start with you, though. We've got Trump critic Congressman Adam Kinzinger. He announced today that he is retiring from Congress. What does that mean for this Congress and for the potential next Congress?
Well, I'll give Julia plenty of time. I'll just say this. As Trump echoed today, he said 2 down, 8 to go. Of course, he's talking about the 10 Republicans that voted against him in impeachment in the House. Look, I just think ultimately, Kinzinger was a guy who's going to retire. So, I mean, Trump's going to call this a victory. And if you think about it, it just plays to more of Trump's narrative. There's a lot more nuance to it. But, it's a victory technically for Trump, at least from a PR standpoint.
Yeah, and I would say that for Kinzinger, he was facing an uphill battle as it was, given the fact that there was redistricting happening in Illinois in favor of Democrats. So it was a pretty tough situation for him to begin with.
All right, you were able to manage to squeeze it in. Both David and Julia, thank you so much. We're going to ask you both to rest up over the weekend because we've got a busy week ahead. Thanks so much, and we'll be back right after the break. Well, welcome back. The clock is ticking for mandatory vaccination deadlines, spawning protests across the country. For thousands of first responders in New York City, that deadline to prove they've had a shot or risk losing their job is tonight. CBN's Brody Carter reports on where things stand.
Given tonight's deadline, we may not know the full impact until possibly next week. Part of that is because of legal fights. One New York judge is allowing the city's mandate to proceed, denying a police union request for a temporary restraining order. That union represents 24,000 NYC police. On the state front, an appeals court is expected to rule possibly next week on a federal judge's decision allowing state healthcare workers a religious exemption. More than 160,000 police, firefighter, and other New York City workers are questioning their value.
We're not anti-vaccine, we're anti-mandate.
Protests boiled over Thursday outside Mayor Bill de Blasio's residence. Workers were told not to come to work Monday if they're not fully vaccinated.
I'm an American, and it's a freedom of choice. Everybody should have a freedom of choice.
My job is to keep people safe, my employees and 8.8 million people.
68% of FDNY firefighters are fully vaccinated, leaving 2,500 firefighters that haven't complied. And now the largest fire department in the United States scrambling to staff the city's 218 firehouses.
You're going to see dozens and dozens of firehouses closed. You're going to see response times climb. It is inevitable. Lives are going to be lost.
That's on the city of New York. They're making determinations to force feed this, and the ramifications of this are outlandish.
We're seeing similar pushback in cities like Chicago and L.A. Chicago city workers sued Mayor Lori Lightfoot over her vaccine mandate. And in L.A., roughly 2,000 employees could lose their job mid-December if they don't comply. Nationwide, 25% of workers facing a mandate have yet to get the shot.
The OSHA rule, that one hasn't even come out still. It still hasn't not come out yet after all these weeks. And I wonder whether it's not come out because it's got a lot of problems.
The Biden administration facing another lawsuit from Florida Governor Ron DeSantis, calling mandates overreaching. And this letter, signed by 21 attorneys general, was sent to Mr. Biden, expressing concerns with the administration's decision to require federal contractors be vaccinated. The national outlook for COVID has improved considerably since September. Caseloads are flat or falling in more than 40 states. This is 2/3 of Americans 12 and up have been fully vaccinated. I'm Brody Carter, CBN News.
Thank you, Brody. Republicans and Democrats both agree voting reform is a top priority. When we come back, we look at why each side has a different approach. Next on Fake Nation. Welcome back. While many see next week's elections, especially that tight governor's race in Virginia, as a potential harbinger for the 2022 midterms, the country is still dealing with the fallout of the 2020 election, which resulted in both parties calling for major voting reforms. Though, as CBN Capitol Hill correspondent Abigail Robertson explains, those calls look drastically different for Republicans than for Democrats.
While both Republicans and Democrats have made election integrity a major part of their platform in state and federal races, the parties are taking very different approaches toward reform.
It's ludicrous for any Republican to assert that the federal government has no role to play in safeguarding elections.
Democrats recently failed to advance the Freedom to Vote Act in the Senate. The measure would expand early and mail-in voting, allow for automatic and same-day voter registration, ease ID requirements, and prevent what they call voter suppression.
It would put in all kinds of very bad provisions that would make elections more insecure and really cause problems in future elections.
Hans von Spakovsky of the Heritage Foundation argues that voter suppression isn't a problem.
That is evidenced by the fact that, for example, in the last election last year, we had the highest turnout in an election since 1992, according to the U.S. Census Bureau. So the idea that there's voter suppression going on is just belied by the evidence.
States under GOP control, like Texas and Georgia, are passing bills that include ID requirements for absentee ballots, revised times for early voting, and bans unsolicited requests for mail-in ballots.
The best way to inspire confidence is to fix the vulnerabilities that currently exist, and that's what a number of states like Georgia, Texas, Florida, and others. They've passed election reform bills to actually try to fix some of those problems.
Spakowski tells CBN News states should also conduct audits after elections.
The whole point of an audit is not to overturn a prior election, but to make sure that all the laws and regulations were followed, that everyone was able to vote who was eligible to vote, that the equipment all worked the way it should.
With former President Trump doubling down on claims of widespread voter fraud in 2020, the question remains how that might affect turnout in close statewide governor races like New Jersey and Virginia.
If voters believe that the system is rigged and their vote isn't going to count, then that's certainly a disincentive to vote.
Inside Elections' Nathan Gonzalez told CBN News despite those claims, he believes voters from both parties will show up at the polls.
I think in the case of Virginia, Republicans are anxious to send a message to President Joe Biden and the Democrats. And I think that any concerns about the system will be overcome with enthusiasm to send a message.
Gonzalez believes no matter who wins these upcoming races, claims of fraud or vote rigging by the party that loses are likely to follow. Reporting from Virginia, Abigail Robertson, CBN News.
All right, thank you, Abigail. Coming up, the moment on the high school gridiron that had two rival teams celebrating one player's win together. We explain next on Faith Nation. And finally tonight, two high school football teams put aside their rivalry for a moment to create an unforgettable memory for one special student. High school senior Isaiah Martinez is at practice every day, helping to put a smile on every face of the Lovington Wildcats football team in New Mexico. Martinez, who has Down syndrome, proved last weekend there's more to the game than the score. With the Wildcats up 46-14 over gridiron rival Ruidoso, the Wildcats coach called an audible, sending in Martinez for a 44-yard run and a Wildcat touchdown. It produced a moment so joyous both teams cleared the benches to celebrate the young man's first ever touchdown. This is the power of sport, bringing athletes together, a special moment for what looks to be a special, special young man. Well, thank you so much for watching. We appreciate you being here. And from all of us here at CBN, have a great weekend.